Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at the CBP One app.
Yeah.
It started as this little tool for travelers, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, right in the middle of U.S. immigration policy. And then just as quickly as it came on the scene,
Right.
Trump is back in office and cancels it. So we've got a lot to cover today. We're going to be looking at news articles. We've got official CBP information, and we've even got some interesting opinions from Reddit.
Wow.
Yeah,
Sounds like a wild ride.
it really is.
It's amazing to me how something like a piece of technology, like an app, we think of technology as being this neutral thing. But the CBP One app is a great example of how it gets so tied up with human stories and politics, desperation.
Right.
It's a reminder that even the most technical tools can have huge consequences.
Okay, so first things first, what exactly is the CBP One app?
Right.
So for anyone who isn't super familiar, can you give us the basics?
Sure. So CBP One started back in 2020 as like a mobile app, just meant to make life easier for anyone who has to interact with U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
Right.
You want to check the wait times at a border crossing, or maybe apply for an I-94, that document you need when you enter the U.S. by land. It was just about streamlining all of that stuff.
Right, so making it all
Yeah.
nice and smooth.
Yeah, exactly.
But then things changed, didn't they?
Well, yeah, the app, it evolved. And it actually ended up becoming the main way that people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela were applying to get into the U.S.
Wow.
And here's the thing, they were applying for what's called parole, which is this legal thing that lets people come into the U.S. temporarily,
Okay.
even if they don't have like a regular visa. It's often used in humanitarian situations,
Yeah.
So you can see how this app, it became crucial.
It did. It became a real lifeline. And the AP News article that I read about Carla, the Cuban nurse, and Martha, who lives in Tijuana, really shows just how big of an impact it had.
Totally. I mean, their story shows how, for many people, the app wasn't just about convenience.
Right.
It was a way out.
Yeah.
Like a path to escape a bad situation. We're talking about Cubans leaving their country in record numbers.
Yeah.
And with CBP, nearly 1 million people found this way to legally at least try to get into the U.S.
Yeah. It wasn't just about getting to the U.S., though, was it? The article talked about how Carla ended up treating Martha's dog bites.
Oh, yeah.
While she was staying with her, waiting for her CBP One appointment. And that one chance encounter turned into Martha opening her home to all these other migrants. It's this amazing support network that sprung up out of a really chaotic situation.
It just goes to show the ripple effects of something like this. The article even quotes Carla. She's a medical assistant in Houston now. And she said she and her partner came to the U.S. to continue to grow professionally and to support their future children. You can hear the hope in her voice, the hope that CBP One made possible. But of course, with anything related to immigration, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There was plenty of scrutiny surrounding the app.
Yeah. It seems like CBP One couldn't stay out of the spotlight. It was controversial.
It really was.
Yeah.
Everyone had an opinion. And the sources we looked at, they really show that full range.
Yeah.
Like on one side, you've got Biden administration officials. They're saying CBP One was a success.
Yeah.
It helped manage all the migration.
Right.
And it stopped people from taking those dangerous illegal routes.
But then on the other side, you've got Trump's allies, and they're saying that the app was too lenient, that it was actually encouraging more immigration.
Right. And there was even that Senate bill in 2023 that tried to ban CBP One from being used for admitting migrants at all.
Wow. So yeah, it seems like a lot of people were really pushing back against it.
It's complicated. You've got some Republican lawmakers saying they want stricter immigration policies, but then you look at the economy. And some industries actually rely on undocumented labor. It makes you wonder if that disconnect, between what politicians are saying and what's actually happening in the economy, if that's part of why there was so much pushback against CBP One.
It definitely adds another layer to think about. But regardless of people's motivations, everything changed when Trump came back into office. And one of his first moves was to completely scrap CBP One. Thousands of appointments just gone. The AP article really captures how much confusion and anxiety people felt.
Yeah, and think about the people who are already in the U.S. on parole. Their lives are in limbo.
Right.
Their permits are expiring, and they don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
It's a huge human cost.
And of course, the internet exploded. The Reddit threads I saw were full of people arguing about whether Trump was truly against all immigration or if this was just a political move. It just shows how divided we are on this issue.
It really does.
So what happens to the app now?
Well, the CBP website still mentions CBP One, but it's been stripped down.
What do you mean?
It's back to just the basic functions.
Oh, I got
Like
you.
checking wait times and applying for I-94s, All the stuff related to asylum. That seems to be gone.
Wow. CBP One started by making things easier for travelers. Then it became this lifeline for migrants. And now it's shut down.
Yeah. What a journey.
It really has been.
And it's not over yet. The consequences are still unfolding.
It really makes you wonder what's next for all the people left stranded with their appointments canceled. What does this mean for the future of U.S. immigration policy? It feels like things are changing in a big way.
They are. And this deep dive, it's really brought some interesting stuff to light. You know, that Senate bill we talked about, the one that wanted to ban CBP, one from being used for immigration?
Right.
It didn't pass, but the fact that it was even proposed is telling.
Yeah, it makes you think about the conversation we were having about how some groups might actually benefit from a steady flow of undocumented labor if it's harder to come here legally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You create a workforce that's more vulnerable.
Yeah.
People who are afraid to speak up about unfair treatment because they don't want to get deported. It's a tough thing to think about.
For sure.
But it's important to understand the potential consequences.
Absolutely. It adds another layer to understanding why people reacted the way they did to Trump's decision. The AP News article we talked about had people expressing all sorts of emotions, fear, uncertainty, and then you see some comments on Reddit that are almost celebratory.
Right. It just goes to show how divided people are when it comes to immigration.
Yeah.
Is it a threat or an opportunity, a burden or a source of strength?
Right.
These are questions we have to ask ourselves as a society.
And it's not just abstract ideas either. It's real people's lives. You know that story about Carla and Martha and Tijuana? It shows the human cost of these policy changes. Here's Martha dealing with her own struggles, and she opens her home to complete strangers. It's amazing.
Yeah. It really emphasizes the human element of all of this. We're not just talking about numbers and policies.
Right.
We're talking about people's lives, the choices they make when they're facing huge challenges.
Exactly. So what now? CBP One is gone, at least in its original form. What options are left for the people who are counting on it?
That's the big question. The CBP website is pretty vague about what the future holds for the app. But we can look back at what's happened before to see if there are any clues.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't the first time Trump has targeted immigration.
You're right. Back in his first term, he drastically reduced the number of refugees allowed in the U.S.
Year after year, he set new record lows. So canceling CBP One could be part of a bigger plan to make it even harder to immigrate legally.
It's a pattern we need to pay attention to.
And it leaves us with a lot of questions. What about the people who were already in the process of applying through CBP One? Will we see more people trying to cross the border illegally because they're desperate?
It's a lot to unpack. It highlights how everything is connected. Technology, politics, human stories. We can't just look at one thing in isolation.
It always comes back to that big question, what kind of country do we want to be? How do we find that balance between keeping our borders secure and being compassionate?
Exactly. And those are questions we need to be asking ourselves as citizens. For sure. This whole CBP One situation, it might seem like just one small thing. But it's a reminder that policy decisions have real consequences in the real world.
It's a reminder that we need to stay informed and involved. We have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable and push for policies that reflect our values.
I couldn't agree more. So before we wrap things up, I'm curious, what are your main takeaways from all of this? What's really sticking with you?
For me, it's the contrast that stands out. You have the hope that CBP One offered to people like Carla, and then you have the political maneuvering all the different agendas at play. It's like a miniature version of all the challenges we face as a society.
It really is. It's about access and equity, the power of technology, but also its limits. And in the end, it comes down to our shared humanity.
That's a lot to consider.
It is, but it's important that we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't let these conversations stop at the headlines.
Yeah.
We need to dive deeper into the complexities, the nuances, the human stories behind it all.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with CBP One as this simple customs app, then it became this lifeline for migrants, and now it's gone.
Yeah, we've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Something to really chew on.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how CBP One affected things here in the U.S.
Right.
But what about the global perspective?
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
This app that started as a way to manage border crossings, it became this major factor in migration patterns, especially for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And now that it's gone, it's created a lot of uncertainty for those who are already in the system.
Right. But you're thinking bigger picture.
I am. What if this whole thing with CBP, One, what if it becomes this catalyst for other countries to rethink how they handle their own borders?
Interesting. You mean like a ripple effect where other countries start creating their own versions of CBP One?
Exactly. Or maybe they go the other way and make things even stricter.
Either way, it could completely change how migration works around the world.
And that's the question I want to leave our listeners with today. How will this whole CBP One saga, something that seemed very U.S. focused, how will it impact migration on a global scale? I don't know the answer, but it's something worth thinking about.
It really underscores how connected we all are, even when we're dealing with issues that seem local. Decisions like this, they can have consequences that reach far beyond national borders.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how interconnected the world is.
It does.
This app, it was meant to make things simpler for travelers, and then all of a sudden it's this beacon of hope for so many people, and now, poof, it's gone.
Yeah, and we're left wondering what happens to all those people.
Exactly.
What does this mean for immigration in the U.S.?
It feels like we're at a crossroads.
We are, and this deep dive, it's helped us understand some of the factors at play.
Right.
Remember that Senate bill we talked about, the one that tried to ban CBP One from being used for immigration?
Yeah.
Didn't pass. But it's a sign of the times, you know?
It is, and it ties into that whole idea of some groups benefiting from undocumented labor if you make it harder to immigrate legally.
Right, you might end up with a workforce that's more vulnerable. People who are afraid to speak out about unfair treatment because they're worried about being deported.
It's a tough reality to face.
It is, but it's
Yeah.
important to understand the potential consequences.
Absolutely. And it helps explain why people reacted the way they did when Trump canceled CBP One. The AP News article showed a real mix of emotions, fear, uncertainty. And then you go on Reddit and some people are actually celebrating.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how divided we are when it comes to immigration.
It really is.
Is it a threat or an opportunity, a burden or a source of strength? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves as a nation.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but then you read about Carla and Martha and Diwana, and it brings it all back down to earth. These are real people whose lives are being affected.
Absolutely.
Martha, she's facing her own challenges, but she still opens her home to strangers who need help. It's true compassion.
It is a reminder that these policy decisions, they have a human cost.
So what happens now? CBP One is gone. What options are there for the people who are relying on it?
Well, the CBP website doesn't say much about the future of the app. But maybe we can look to the past for some clues.
What do you mean?
This isn't the first time Trump has targeted immigration.
You're right. He drastically reduced the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. during his first term.
Year after year, he kept setting new record lows.
Wow.
So maybe canceling CBP One is part of a bigger strategy to restrict legal immigration even more.
That's a worrying thought.
It is, and it raises so many questions.
Like, what happens to all those people who were already in the process of applying through CBP One? Will we see an increase in illegal border crossings because people are desperate?
These are questions that need to be answered.
They do, and it just shows how everything is connected. Technology, politics, human lives.
We can't look at these things in isolation.
It always seems to come back to that same fundamental question. What kind of country do we want to be?
Right. Can we find a way to be both secure and compassionate?
It's a question we need to keep asking ourselves, both as individuals and as a nation.
I completely agree. This whole CBP One story might seem small on the surface, but it's a powerful reminder that policy decisions have real consequences for real people.
They do, and it's a call to action for all of us.
What do you mean?
We can't just sit back and watch. We have a responsibility to stay informed, to engage in these important conversations, to push for policies that reflect our values.
I couldn't agree more. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what has stood out to you the most?
You know, what strikes me is the contrast. The hope that CBP One offered to people like Carla, and then the political gamesmanship, the different agendas at play. It's like a microcosm of the challenges we face as a society.
It really is. It's a story about access and equity, the power and limitations of technology. And at its core, it's about our shared humanity.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but these are conversations we need to be having. Absolutely. We need to go beyond the headlines and really dig into the complexities, the nuances, the human stories behind it all.
Well said. We've really explored the whole CBP One story, haven't we?
We have, from its simple beginnings as a customs app, to its role in shaping migration flows, and finally to its abrupt end.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and we've looked at it from all angles, the different viewpoints, the impacts on real people's lives, Even those insightful discussions happening online.
It's been a true deep dive.
It has. But as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay, what is it?
We focused a lot on what CBP One meant for the U.S.
Right.
But what about the global implications?
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
This app that started as a way to streamline border crossings, it ended up having a huge impact on migration patterns.
Especially for certain nationalities, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans.
And now, with its cancellation, it's created a lot of uncertainty for people all over the world.
It has. So you're thinking bigger picture.
I am. What if this whole CBP One situation becomes a catalyst for other countries to rethink how they manage their own borders?
Interesting thought.
Do you think other countries will follow suit and create their own versions of CBP One?
Maybe.
Or will they go in the opposite direction and make their borders even harder to cross?
It's hard to say.
Either way, it could have a huge impact on global migration patterns.
And that's what I want our listeners to ponder as we finish up today. How will this CBP One story, something that seems so specific to the U.S., how will it ultimately shape the future of migration around the world?
It's a question worth considering.
It is. It really highlights the interconnected nature of our world and how decisions made in one place can ripple outwards and affect people everywhere.
It's a reminder that we're all part of a global community, and the choices we make, they have the power to shape the future.
Yeah.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I encourage you to keep exploring these questions, to engage in thoughtful dialogue, and to consider how you can contribute to creating a more just and compassionate world for everyone.